You're watching the History Fella channel, and in this video we're looking at the Big Sandy Expedition. The Big Sandy Expedition was an early campaign of the American Civil War in Kentucky that began in mid-September 1861, when Union Brigadier General William Bull Nelson received orders to organize a new brigade at Marysville, Kentucky, and conduct an expedition into the Big Sandy Valley region of eastern Kentucky and stop the buildup of Confederate forces under Colonel John S. Williams. This was done in 3 phases, from September the 21st to October the 20th, 1861. Nelson assembled a brigade of 5,500 Union volunteers from Ohio and Kentucky. On October the 23rd, the southern prong secured Hazel Green and the northern prong of West Liberty. The 2 prongs were consolidated at Salyersville, and they began the final phase of October the 31st. This led to the Battle of Ivy Mountain on November the 8th, and the withdrawal of Confederate forces from Pikeville on November the 9th, 1861. During the first week of September 1861, all pretense of neutrality in Kentucky ended when Major General Leonidas Polk ordered Brigadier General Gideon Pillow advance Confederate troops up to Hickman, Kentucky. On September the 18th, Kentucky legislature approved the introduction of federal troops from outside the state, the pro-Confederate legislators staying away. The next day, Simon Bolivar Buckner, former commander of the Kentucky State Guard, established a Confederate headquarters at Bowling Green, Kentucky, whilst troops under Felix K. Zollicoffer seized Barberville. Shortly afterwards, Zollicoffer arrived at Cumberland Ford with approximately 3,200 men, consisting of 4 infantry regiments, a field battery of 6 guns, and 4 cavalry companies. This posed an imminent threat to Union control of central Kentucky, at a time when increasing numbers of Confederates in the Big Sandy Valley of eastern Kentucky appeared about to enter the Bluegrass region through McCormack's Gap. In response, Brigadier General George H. Thomas ordered troops from Camp Dick Robinson to southeast Kentucky to halt any movement towards Big Hill in Richmond and Lexington. Former Vice President of the United States John C. Breckinridge and his ally Colonel Humphrey Marshall added to Thomas's concerns with a call for peace men and states' rights men to assemble in Lexington for drill. However, both Breckinridge and Marshall instead rose to Mount Sterling to join the Confederate forces in western Virginia, where Marshall took command of the Army of the Eastern Kentucky, posted at Piketon. Several days later, Bull Nelson publicly announced he had established his headquarters at Camp Kenton, near Washington, Kentucky, and would arm and equip volunteers to end treason in Kentucky. The Philadelphia Press wrote that the Big Sandy Expedition would prevent the Confederates from taking control of the mouth of the Big Sandy River, where it entered the Ohio River. This would protect the rear and right flank of Brigadier General William S. Rosecrans in western Virginia, allowing Nelson to reinforce Wildcat Mountain and to push Zollicoffer back to Knoxville. Nelson made Olympia in Bath County the staging area. He named it Camp Gill in honor of Harrison Gill, owner of the renowned Spa 8 miles south of Owensville and 20 miles east of Mount Sterling. The Mount Sterling Pound Gap Road ran through McCormack's Gap, the gateway to Bluegrass region from Prestonburg. On September the 29th, 1861, Major John Smith Hurt occupied the Vital Mountain Pass with 3 militia. Colonel Lewis Braxton Grigsby added his 300 men to Hurt's 200 on October the 8th. Colonel John Perry Fife had the 59th Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment march to Camp Kenton, and Colonel Leonard A. Harris arrived in Olympian Springs with the 2nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Colonel Jesse S. Norton came forward from Nicholasville with the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, and during the next 2 weeks, Nelson's forces grew to about 5,500 men, 3,700 from Ohio and 1,800 from Kentucky. At a farm near Prestonsburg, Confederate Captains Andrew Jackson May and John Ficklin assisted Cairo Cordo, John S. Williams, with the organization of the 5th Kentucky Infantry. The 1,000-man unit was badly close. Some called the hard-nosed group of the Ragamuffin Regiment. The 9 companies of infantry and 5 mounted companies had 2 pieces of artillery, and they carried in an assortment of personal weapons that were ill-suited to warfare. On Monday, October the 21st, 1861, troops that Nelson had assembled at Camp Dick Robinson became engaged in a protracted fight with Zollicoffer's Confederates along the Wilderness Road at Wildcat Mountain. The next morning, Nelson was unaware of this when he ordered 1,600 men under Colonel Leonard Harris to advance 35 miles to West Liberty with 2 artillery pieces. At dawn on Wednesday, Nelson was in front of Hazel Green with about 3,500 men and artillery. 38 of the 200 Confederates surrendered after a brief fight. 12 miles north of West Liberty, 500 to 700 Confederates suffered a loss of 21 dead, 40 wounded, and 34 captured. The Federal loss was 2 wounded. While Nelson waited for his wagon trains to catch up, he consolidated his forces at Licking Station. The operation resumed on October 31st, and on reaching Prestonsburg, they found the supposed Gibraltar of eastern Kentucky abandoned. Thursday, November the 7th, Colonel Joshua W. Sill started the northern prong of the Big Sandy expedition towards Johns Creek. From there he was to veer south for about 40 miles and gain the rear of the enemy at Pikeville. The following morning, Nelson took the main column of 3,500 men towards Pikeville on the Old State Road. Heavy rain fell in torrents as they neared Ivy Mountain, a hogback 1,000-foot hill about half a mile long. The West Levasseur Fork of the Big Sandy River restricted movement on the right of the 7-foot wide path, and knee-deep mud forced the artillery to unlimber their guns and rig them so they could follow the infantry forward in a single file. About 15 miles west of Pikeville, the advance guard disappeared in the elbow of the path as it turned down towards the crossing at Ivy Creek. Directly to their front there were 250 Confederates, some 100 foot up the hill and hidden behind rocks, trees and bushes. At about 1 p.m, that hillside exploded with blue smoke from the double-barreled shotguns and the old muskets carried by the Confederates. In the next instant, 4 Union soldiers were dead, and another 13 lay on the ground wounded. Nelson rushed forward with his saber drawn, climbed up the conspicuously located rock, and told his men that if the rebels could not hit him, they could not hit any of them. He ordered the 2nd Ohio Infantry and 21st Ohio Infantry to push up the side of the mountain and flank the enemy position from the north. At the same time, Nelson had 2 light artillery pieces take up position near the mouth of Ivy Creek and West Levasseur Fork and fire directly into the enemy breastworks. At about 2:20 p.m, the 21st Ohio Infantry arrived at the top of the hill. They rolled large boulders down on the Confederates, who ran off in every direction. 1/2 hour later, Captain May had his men felling trees and burning bridges to retard pursuit. The Battle of Ivy Mountain was a clear victory for the Union force under Nelson, who had gained full control of the field at a loss of 6 killed and 24 wounded. The opposing Confederates had 10 dead, 15 wounded, and 50 missing or taken prisoner. Nelson ended the pursuit beyond the Burns Bridge at Coldwater Creek and near the home of the Unionist, Lindsay Lane. Williams continued on Pikeville, where he posted a rear guard of 400 men to cover a withdrawal to Pound Gap, with the remainder of his force. And at 3 a.m. Saturday, November the 9th, Nelson had his troops back in pursuit. Terrible road conditions retarded movement, and by nightfall he remained 5 miles from Pikeville. Early Sunday, November the 10th, Nelson had come within several miles of the objective when a detachment of Joshua Sill's Northern Prong rode forward to advise that they secured the town at 4 p.m. Saturday. In Pound Gap, Colonel Williams reported that Nelson had dispersed an unorganized and half-armed barefooted squad that lacked everything but the will to fight. The Cincinnati Commercial noted that Nelson had shown how troops could be moved across the unforgiving terrain without adequate transportation. That determination had truly surprised Williams, who believed that Nelson would continue into Virginia with the intent of destroying the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad, a line that had connected the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, with the Memphis, Tennessee, and the Mississippi Valley at Knoxville. In the first accounts of the fighting at Ivy Mountain, Northern news correspondents grossly misrepresented the events because their Northern audience wanted a quick conclusion to the war. Those mistakes led to the Cincinnati Gazette to conclude that while a great victory had been attained, the campaign in eastern Kentucky has no more permanent effect than the passage of a showman's caravan. 500 rebel guerrilla cavalry will undo a week of the ornamental work.